Okay, so guys, with the IKEA cabinets, generally if you build one, you build pretty much them all. So I'm going to give you a quick step-by-step run through on building one of my upper cabinets. Step one means I need four of these post screws per panel. So I'm going to grab everything I need. I always like to just lay out the screws where they're supposed to go before I do any drilling. And then I'm going to use a drill for this, but just be very careful. If you use a little bit too much force or bend these things sideways, you could tear a big gash in the particle board and wreck this hole. So just very slow and steady, nice even pressure with the drill. So step two in this case is to install the hangers that mount to the rail. There's a very specific bolt pattern on these. So again, just make sure you're following the recommendations in the instruction. So step three involves taking these little wood dowels. There's very specific holes that you need to slide these into. There's eventually dowels on this side too, but the instructions say to do one at a time. So those post hole screws slide into one side, and then the wooden dowels slide into the other side. Those post hole screws are screwed into this side and slotted into that side. So IKEA has these metal lock washers that you screw into the post and it locks the two pieces together. These don't need a lot of pressure. They just go in a specific way with the arrow pointing towards the screw, and then it's just a half turn, locks it in place. So they tell you to build it this way so that you can slide the back in through the open side into the track. You want the white side facing the inside of the cabinet. But these openings in the back, these need to go at the top of the cabinet because these allow the clips that hook onto the rail system that supports the cabinet on the wall. These allow those clips to poke through from the wall of the cabinet and hook onto that latch or that rail. On the perimeter of these side walls and bottom walls, there's a dotted line. That dotted line is where you're going to want to put the nails. In addition to that, there's two little clips. So you don't need these on the base cabinets, but you need them on the upper cabinets. The purpose of these clips is creates a surface for the cabinet to sit level against the wall, and it basically just pushes the bottom of the cabinet out from the wall a little bit and makes it sit level with the top of the cabinet, which is mounted on the rail. Without these, the cabinet would have a slight kink in it, about a ½ inch, and it'd be super noticeable. So make sure you put these on. Just space them out a few inches away from the edge. Okay, and then just space the rest of the nails evenly throughout the perimeter of the cabinet. Alright guys, so I've brought in this 18-inch cabinet to show you guys the setup I'm going to be working with. The good thing about this build is that I'm actually showing you both ways to install these cabinets. One, using the built-in-place base, just custom base for your situation like I have here. It's pretty easy. And then the other way is to actually use the IKEA rail system provided when you buy the cabinets. I'm going to use the rail system on the upper cabinets, so it's exactly the same as if it would be for the lower cabinets. And then additionally, just for a bit of demonstration here, I'm going to put in, I have a 36-inch cabinet that's going to span from that cabinet to this edge here. And I'm going to have to cut a very large hole into that thing in order to fitted around these pipes. I don't plan on moving these pipes. I plan on basically cutting a huge hole in the back of the cabinet to slide the cabinet around the pipes. And that'll all be concealed by the doors when everything's done, and you won't even be able to tell this is here. So the next thing I'm going to want to do is get up my clamps, some particle board screws, and a few shims, and just go around and make sure the edges are all flush with one another. In my case, I need to make sure this side wall is flush with the side of the base I installed here. My overhang gap is going to be consistent all the way along. I'm a little bit lower than the top of the false countertop that I previously built behind this, but I'm not too worried about that. I'm going to put a piece of plywood over top of this, which will serve as the base for the concrete countertop that I'm going to install in place afterwards. So pretty happy with this. I'll go ahead and finish it off. I want to make sure that the face of this wall is square with the face of that wall, which is, in my case, is going to require a little bit of shimming. So I'm going to start by taking the distance from this corner to the back wall, and then make sure that that distance is true for every corner of every cabinet along my whole run. So I've got 32 3/4. I'm just gonna temporarily shim these as I go. The shims will just make sure things aren't bouncing around as I'm working my way across. And once I get everything to where I want it, I'll show you guys how to clamp it and screw it all into place. Okay, perfect. So before we actually screw these cabinets to the wall, the next step is to screw the cabinets to one another. In order to do that, we're just going to use a level, make sure everything on the front faces are nice and level, and the tops are all nice and level, and then we're going to use a series of clamps to hold everything together and just screw it into place. Once the tops are nice and flush, you can simply just use a woodworking clamp it in place. My face is nice and flush. I like to do a clamp at the top and a clamp at the bottom. It just really tightens up the gaps. And then I usually just kind of try and screw it in an out of the way place in all four corners. Okay, now that that's done, I'll show you guys how to use the IKEA hardware to screw this thing to the wall rather than to the rail. So when you're screwing it to the wall, in our case, there's a black filler piece. Install that filler piece first. It just slides in there. That almost acts as a plastic shim. Because they're assuming that you're using the rail system, the instructions will tell you to drill it into this hole. Have this template set one bolt forward, but because we're mounting it into the wall rather than the rail, we're going to use the closer bolt pattern that I'm using now. IKEA provides these nice washers that mount nicely with their hardware. There's little grippers on the washer that slide into these slots. And then IKEA has this nice little cover plate that clips right onto these fins. It covers up the unsightly hardware. Okay, so before I install the upper cabinets, there's a little bit of layout I've got to do. So first thing, my faucet head is about 20 inches, and my countertop is going to be about 2 to 3 inches. I'm not sure yet. I want to make sure I've got quite a bit of buffer area here between the top of my counter and the underside of my cabinets, just because I don't want to have a tight area where my faucet's going to hit. That's one key thing to consider when you're installing these cabinets. Usually a typical install is 18 inches above the counter height, but in my situation I have one set row of cabinet height straight across. Ordinarily there's a shallow cabinet above the kitchen to accommodate a wider opening for the faucet. I don't have that in my situation, so I'm going to make sure that I'm installing my cabinets higher than the typical 18 inches to make sure I have enough room. You always want to consider all of the end parameters of your layout when you're deciding just where to put your cabinet. I'm going to go 48 inches is the top of my cabinet. And then next, I need to prepare the rail. So this whole thing is about 5 feet. I want to locate the studs in this wall to make sure that the side that I cut lines up nicely with the studs. So there's a stud right there. If you have a stud finder, you can use that, that's great. I drilled a screw there. It's going to be concealed afterwards by the cabinet, and you can tell when you're drilling a screw into a stud rather than just an open cavity of drywall. So I'm going to cut it right there, and you can see that I've got a stud 1, 2, 3 holes away, basically dead center. So that's great. That's going to work out awesome. I'm going to go ahead and try and cut this thing. Ordinarily, I would use a grinder or a saw with a metal blade, but I'm going to try and do it with snips today. So now we need to determine the height that we're actually going to screw the rail on to the wall. These clips, I was mentioning when I was installing the base, I screwed these with that black piece, that black spacer right into the stud. In this case, the clips are going to be used to hang this thing on the rail. The rail sits 1/8 of an inch below the top of the cabinet, and the rail, the top of the clip, sits on top of this track here. This whole thing just kind of rocks in place like that, and the cabinet sits beautifully on that. So 1/8 of an inch down, and this depth is 1 3/8. 1 3/8 plus 1/8 is 1.5 inches, and my top of my cabinet was 48 inches. So that means that I'm going to install my rail at 46.5 inches above the countertop that I have installed here. All right, guys, so I've got a laser line projected on the wall at 46.5 inches. And you can see I kind of had to rig up a little setup with my tripod on top of a garbage can. Alternatively, you could just use a level and trace the line on the wall using that, but I like to use the laser level to make sure it's nice and accurate. So now that I've got my line set on the wall at the right height, it's set up right here. So set up right here at 46.5 inches. That was the height that I determined I was going to need prior. So now I'm going to go ahead and use my handy green level and trace a nice neat line on the wall, and then I'll use that as a guide to mount the rail. So I know that this is my location for the end of where I want my first cabinet. So it's very important that I'm going to set my rail back slightly from that. I actually cut it a little bit short from the full length in anticipation of that. So I've got that one loosely fit in. I'm going to do one of the center ones so I can pivot this a little bit. Okay, I think that's all I'm going to find for studs in this wall. There's a few gaps in the stud spacing because I have some vertical pipes, but I have 3 solid screws in here, and all this rail is supporting is 2 upper cabinets, so I'm not too worried about it. These 3 screws are capable of holding like 250 pounds a piece, so that's 750 pounds of laundry soap that I won't be putting into my cabinet. So I think I'm pretty good. All right, now I can actually go ahead and throw these things up on the wall. Okay, that was a bit tricky. My wall was a bit curved. Once it's on the rail, usually slides pretty easily back and forth. Okay, but just so you guys can see, I'm just going to slide this one down. So that's the great thing about these cabinets. You don't have to worry about holding the cabinet in place while you try and screw it in the wall and make sure everything's level. The rail's perfectly level, and I'm just going to hook this cabinet onto it, and it's basically going to be done. Okay, so that's it. These guys are pretty much installed and look great. The next step is to install finish panels on the sides as well as a little decorative strip on the bottom. And then once that's all done, I can go ahead and install the doors. But before I do that, there's a few additional pieces of hardware that I need to install just to secure the uppers onto the rail. There's a small little lock washer that just slides right into place, and then you use a flathead screwdriver to lock it. And that just makes sure that the cabinet can't pop off the rail and fall. Let's take the lock washer. It's like a half moon slot, slides nicely into place. And just twist it all the way around. And then take the white cover, the fins, slides nicely over top. So this is an optional piece. You don't have to get this piece if you don't want to, but it's honestly a pretty cheap upgrade. It adds a nice little skirt to the underside of the cabinet and gets encased on either side by the cover panels that cover at both ends. And it really finishes the underside of the cabinets off. And then in addition, it also allows you the ability to add under cabinet lighting if in the future you want to do that, or if you're doing it while you're doing the install. The decorative strip covers any light bulbs or anything, and that's all just installed right behind. I've already drilled the mounting hardware, so I've already installed the hardware at approximately the right locations. There's no real specific locations, just evenly spaced where we need it. And then there's a little foam gasket that provides a bit of a buffer between the two. You need to have it lined up on both ends. They say to install it about 5 millimeters back from the face of the cabinet. I'm going to use a screw head as a bit of a template and just try and get this installed as close as I can. Now the very tricky part is going to be screwing this in while I'm holding it. The even trickier part is going to be trying to change my drill bit. Okay, I've got it set a little bit far back, but these the mounting hardware has a slot, so I can just back the screw off a little bit and slide it back and forth. All right, so the last step is I'm gonna install the decorative cover panel on the side of the cabinet. These are like one size fits all panels. The thing with that is you gotta cut them to length. So I want this 1/2 inch below my decorative strip. And basically again, I just get it roughed in place. And then I'm going to use these woodworking clamps to hold it in place in order for me to mark it. Now I'm just going to mark the top of the cabinet, top of the panel, where I'm going to make the cut. There's my mark there. I'm just going to finish that up and then go ahead and cut it, and then I'll show you guys how to install it. Okay, so I've got my panel cut to length. Okay, and then exactly the same way I did when I measured it. Cover panel comes with screws for it to install. There's special particle board screws provided for the right thickness, so they're just long enough to embed themselves halfway. So just make sure you use the correct screws, otherwise you run the risk of punching right through to the other side of the panel there. So now that I've showed you guys how to install one of these panels, the process is basically repeated for the remaining panels. In my case, I'm going to do one panel on the opposite side and then 2 larger panels on the bottom. Alright guys, so the next thing I want to show you is just how easy the hinges are to put on these cabinets. It's actually basically a toolless assembly. So first, just grab one of the doors. All of the holes are already pre-drilled. So this is the end that screws into the cabinets, and this is the end that you're going to want to clamp onto the doors. You've got this recessed hole. You basically just push these guys in, and then there's a little clamp that you pretty much just fold down, and that's it. So the one hinge is installed, the other one's just as easy. Okay, so the IKEA hinges are a 2-part hinge system. There's the piece that just snaps nicely onto the back of the cabinet doors, and then there's this receiver piece that allows that hinge to just snap into place to quickly connect the doors. So there's a little arrow on this guy, and the arrow is always to point to the front of the cabinet. In my case, there's a series of like 20 holes. You need to install these hinges at the second one in from the bottom. So you slide the front in, and then the back just pops in place. And that's it. So I'm just going to repeat that for the uppers, and then I'll do a similar process for the lowers. Yeah, the only thing remaining to do on the uppers is install the door handles. I actually purchased my hardware from IKEA. I'm going to install it after I get kind of my countertop and everything fully in place. So maybe I'll cover that in a future video. Alright guys, so that's a wrap. I just finished installing these IKEA cabinets in my laundry room, and they look great. And it's going to look super sharp against the cast in place concrete countertop that is going to finish this whole area off, which I'll feature in an upcoming video. So definitely subscribe if you don't want to miss that. If you guys have any questions, ask them in the comments below. And definitely, if you guys enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and see you next time.